You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything. Some people open up their eyes and see the world they know outside. I can close my eyes and see all that and way beyond. When these trials of life come heavy and these obstacles get hard, feeling like I need some answers, I just go and talk to God. I just go and talk to God when I'm looking for guidance. Need more insight, need vision, need direction when I'm blinded. And I start that conversation with that voice I hear inside me. And the conversation starts with a voice inside that sounds just like me when I talk to God. See God in anything. When I talk to God. Find God in anything. When I talk to God. See God in anything. When I talk to God. Find God in anything. When I talk to God. See God in anything. Your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. My daddy said don't ever assume, ask questions. It's ironic it was that advice that helped this song happen. It was also that advice that led me to my life's blessings. That same advice helped me make it through life's lessons. It was that advice that separates grown-ups away from children. That advice can be the difference from knowing or just believing. It was that advice that brought the gavel down on my decision of breaking the mental chains of this man created religions. It's faith and belief, nonsense, the biggest scam ever. I hate to say it, I swear this one hell of a mental illness. We don't believe no other time. Why we do it with these religions? The fact that COVID's killing while all of these guys is missing. A lot of hide and seek and peekaboos. Guys playing games with you. I'ma just assume he ain't got no COVID miracles. Maybe he ran out after making the donkey talk, or them stories about a guy walking on water tides. This is simply a distraction to keep you away from you and to look outside for a God when the God is inside of you. When you close your eyes at night to pray to that voice you talking to, when you ready to face the truth, you realize that that voice is you. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in.
All right, family. How are y'all doing? Hopefully, y'all can see and hear me just fine. And welcome back to another installment of The Voice of Eli. Yes, we are back, and we are going to have hopefully a good, informative conversation today because I do have a guest with me. A lot of you have heard me talk about how I came out of a church called the Churches of Christ. And well, today, I have a guest who is a retired minister of the Churches of Christ to talk with us on today's topic. I'm going to add it to the screen. What's going on, Kenneth Olison? How you doing,
Yeah,
bro?
it's Kenan. You can call me Ken, and I'm not retired, bro. I'm
Oh, I
active.
thought, my bad. I
I
thought I
preach for
was
the
going off that last conversation. So you still preaching?
yeah, I preach for the MLK Church of Christ here in Gainesville.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, I missed a lot up in there. Well, it's good to have you with us today, and I'm gonna put that comment up just because we have somebody who knows who you are. This individual here said that they used to be under your leadership at the North. Is it pronounced Tinny Hall? Tinny Hall
Yeah,
Church
North
of Christ.
Tennessee down in Tyler. Yeah,
Right.
I don't know who that is though. I don't recognize the screen name.
Okay, and I'm not sure exactly who it is. You know, we have our
Centola.
nicknames out here. Sandra Simmons, she was actually a former member of the church that I had the opportunity to head here in Jacksonville, Florida, and then we have some others. Mr. Terrell, Chris is in the house. I think he's out there too in the Texas, Tyler, Texas area. So on tonight, where I hope to have a conversation, Ken, about the inerrancy of the Bible. But I want to take it a little bit different. My guest may have some questions for you. We're going to perhaps challenge you on a few things or just ask some questions, and we just want your honest answers on, and that is nothing other than our topic: is the Bible inerrant? Inerrant. And so I guess I should start off with that question for you. Um, do you believe that the Bible is inerrant? And then we can go into the further details about why or why not.
Doctrinally wise, absolutely. Now, no one is going to be, I don't know, no one is going to say, no serious student of the Bible is going to say that there are no grammatical errors or typographical errors or things like that. But when we take a look at the theology of the Bible, the concepts that are presented in the Bible, it is absolutely inerrant. It is absolutely irrefutable of that. So if you want to point out, that there may be discrepancies in one copy to the next. Well, yeah, man makes those copies. But when you talk about the concepts that are taught, absolutely inerrant.
Okay. And that's interesting. When you say the concepts are inerrant, what do you mean by the concepts of the Bible?
Okay, I'll explain it to you like this. Where teaching theology is taught in the Bible, let's back up for a minute. Okay, let's look at some facts here for a minute. Okay, the Bible was written over a 1,500-year span. Okay.
Okay.
I'm getting to your question. I want to put some background here so you understand what I'm saying. Over 40 generations. Okay, is how long it took from Genesis to Revelation. Over 40 generations. Over 40 different authors, inspired authors. Okay, from every walk of life. Some authors were kings, some were peasants, some were philosophers, some were fishermen, some were poets, some were statesmen, some were scholars. Moses was a political leader. Peter was a fisherman. Amos was a herdsman. Joshua, a military general. I could go on and on. Nehemiah, a cupbearer. Luke, a doctor. Okay, so you have all of these different men from different walks of life, different eras, different times and places. Many of them did not know, they didn't even know one another. Okay, Moses wrote in the wilderness, Jeremiah from the dungeon, Daniel on the hillside, Paul while he was in prison, Luke while traveling, John while exiled on the island of Patmos. You have all of these different backgrounds, but nonetheless, not one of these authors contradicts each other in concept or theology. They don't contradict. From Genesis to Revelation. When you talk about theology, when you talk about life living, when you talk about these general concepts that teach us to be Christians or to be faithful in God, they do not contradict one another. That's amazing. I challenge you to find 10 educated men today who know one another, who live in the same era, same time, same continent, same place. Pull up one subject, and I almost can guarantee you're not going to get a unanimous agreement on that subject. You can talk about divorce, you could talk about marriage, remarriage, you could talk about capital punishment, capital crimes, LGBTN, racism, whatever you want to talk. You're not going to get 10 people today who will not contradict one another in their thinking, their theology, and their teaching. But here you have 40 different authors over a 1,500-year span, and where their theology is concerned, they never contradict one another. It's absolutely amazing.
Okay, that's interesting. And maybe we'll come to that when you say like theology and when theology is concerned. I wanted to maybe perhaps before we get to the theology, talk about some of the other things, some of the questions about the text itself. There are a number of scholars that are out there and believing Christian scholars that have said things such as like the woman caught in adultery story. They call it in scholarly circles the pericope adulterae. because it is agreed that this is a text or a passage that appears much later, and was not part of the original text. Now, there are a couple others that I'll bring up, but for the sake of time and maybe getting to know you for some of those that are here, have you had any dealings with this passage? And to make it even more weightier, there are at least two preachers me and you talked about offline. I'm not going to mention their names right now, but two preachers that are members of the Church of Christ that do not preach from the woman caught in adultery story, because they say they believe it was not original text. And one more point on this for those that will watch this show and don't say anything. I was at a national lectureship of the Churches of Christ in Chicago when I first heard this at a national lectureship from a preacher there in a class. Just that's for all my Church of Christ people to say, oh, well, Eric Taylor go. No, this was talked about at a national lectureship. And one of the preachers that no longer preaches from this passage was teaching the class that the woman caught in adultery story was not original text. So I have you here with me, Ken. I want to know, what can you tell me about that, and how does that fit into the Bible being inerrant if it was not part of the original text?
All right. Now, for the sake of our listeners, okay, I know you're a learned man. I know that you've been in classes to study this kind of stuff. But for the sake of the people that are, in our chat box, I'm looking at some of them now. Let me build up. Let me put some knowledge in place so they'll know exactly where we're coming from. The subject in question is textual criticism. That's the collegiate, topic or class that we all took. It's the idea of going back and getting the manuscripts and comparing them for validity. Okay. The reason why we have to do that is because back then, people need to remember, they didn't have Xerox machines. They didn't make paper out of trees, out of wood. A lot of times they used animal skin, papyrus, various types of things that they wrote on. And what they wrote on deteriorated pretty quickly. So in order to preserve what was written, they had to make copies. And that's where you get scribes, trained men who would sit down all day, 10, 12 hours a day, and they would copy the text from one paper to another to ensure that we still have the original text. Okay, now, of the first century documents, the ones that Matthew sit down and put pen to paper, as we say, or Paul originally wrote, we don't have any of those original manuscripts. You agree with me, Eli?
Oh, I definitely agree. We don't have any originals, right? No originals.
Okay, we don't have any of the originals that are there at all. Those originals are known in our classes as autographs. Okay. So what we go to in the whole first century, there are no autographs. Matter of fact, 2nd century, 3rd century, all the way to us, there are no autographs. But we may find copies of the originals. That's the best that we have. Now, on my point right there, Eli, because we don't have the originals, I can't prove any more than you can that the text was in the original manuscript or not, in the autograph, because we don't have it. So we can't prove that. Okay, go ahead. You just said.
No, I was saying I was giving you a verbal nod.
Okay, all right, okay. We can't prove that. So then the process goes, for those of you who haven't been in these classes, the process goes then that we try to get the earliest dated copy of the originals, because we figure typically that the earliest dated copy is closest to the original. And so the earliest dated copy, if it has it, the original probably had it. If it didn't have it in the earliest dated copy that we can find, then it probably wasn't in the original. That's the thinking and that's the logic. Okay. But if you go further into textual criticism, then you'll learn that there are other ways you can determine if something was in the original text or could have possibly been in the original text than just getting the earliest manuscript. Okay. So when we take a look at the Woman of the Well, I believe the earliest manuscripts, completed manuscripts that would have them would be the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus, which were right around 4th century AD, which is about 400, AD, or that. So 300 to 400 years after the originals were written, this is when we find it. Okay, so there's a question about it. Okay, well, was it really in the originals? In because the earlier manuscripts, the Peshitta, the Cretonian, the Coptic, they didn't have this story of the Woman of the Well. But we have some others, though. We also have church fathers, people who lived during the same time or close to the same time as Jesus and the apostles. They also wrote things, documents, historicity of events and things that are not in any of the inspired manuals, but they serve as evidence to know that they knew about these stories long before the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus or the 4th century came about. One such person that knew about this would have been Josephus, who lived 37 AD to 100 AD, and he wrote in the Didascalia Apostolorum, he wrote references to the story of the Woman of the Well, and that document is dated as far back as 200 AD, which is 200 years before the earliest manuscripts that contain it. So we know the story was there. Watch this. What he wrote was, he says, "But if you do not receive him who repents, because you are without mercy, you shall sin against the Lord God. For you do not obey our Savior and our God to do even as he did with her who had sinned, whom the elders placed before him, and leaving the judgment in his hands and departed. But he, the searcher of hearts, asked her and said to her, have the elders condemned you, my daughter? She said to him, Nay, Lord. And he said unto her, Go, neither do I condemn you." This was this document proves that they knew about the story right around 200 AD, which is 200 years before the Vaticanus and the Synopticus. So my point is that people understood this story to be there. People understood this story was there. There is a very good chance that it was in the original documents. We don't have them, so neither one of us can prove them. I believe it to be there. I also found writings from historians that said there were men who wanted it removed because they felt that it gave their wives a license to commit adultery because Jesus didn't condemn her. So I read stuff like that, but I have no, evidence of that. So I say to you, I believe it was there because there's evidence as far as 200 AD that it was there, which is far before that gets some of the earlier writings. Just because we don't have the copies of them doesn't mean anything.
That's an interesting answer to that, and I should have backed up here. One of the guests rightfully asked, and I don't think it's because they don't know, but let's define what do we mean when we say inerrant. She's asking what does inerrant mean? So when you say it, okay. So when you say,
I'm sorry.
No, you're good because you admitted already with the grammatical errors, and then I brought up perhaps a passage and that a lot of scholars, probably most, I would say, in depending on what side of the fence they're on, would say that the pericope adultery should be there. So when you say inerrant, even though you believe the Bible doesn't have any mistakes, what would constitute an error? If there were going to be one, what would it need to look like? I know that might be a difficult question for you.
It's a good question. I hadn't really even thought about it, it would have to be here. I'm sure you're aware of the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha.
I'm aware of it. I don't know it as well as the accepted text, which we'll get to, but I know some of them, some of the Maccabean stuff.
There's a lot of debate as to if those books, those texts should have been included. Matter of fact, they were included
In the
in
1611.
Yeah, original Old Testament. Actually, no, actually, they were included up until the Council of Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea,
okay.
a lot of those took those books out of there. But that's neither here nor there. The purpose or the reason that they took them out is because they found things in those books that contradicted other teachings. One such thing that they found in one of the books is this idea of purgatory. This idea that you have a loved one. A lot of people don't even know what purgatory is. And a lot of people don't even realize how many movies we watch that are based off of purgatory. Remember Ghost with Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze? Remember The Sixth Sense?
Yeah, I remember
all
that.
of those. Yeah, all of that is based off this idea of purgatory. But anyway, what the theology said is that if you have a loved one who has died, but they hadn't done enough good works, good deeds to earn their way into heaven, you can save them from hell by purchasing, giving the church so much money on your loved one's behalf. And once you give enough money, the priest will bless them. And contradicts just about everything else written in the pages of inspiration. And so rightfully so, it should not be included. So you asked me, said for an example, if you find something like that, that would be, that would be something like, no, that is a contradiction. You cannot accept that. Someone comes along and says Jesus was not risen from the dead. You find that in the Bible. You find one place where it says he was, another place where the inspired speakers of God said that he wasn't. That would be a contradiction. So you get the idea of what I'm
right. So I get that. And as we continue to build on the inerrancy, I'm trying to just make sure we properly define it before I get deeper into some of the specific issues I think and one might raise about the Bible not containing any mistakes. As going forward with this inerrancy, I want to make sure we've nailed this down though. So definitely there's no, you would say that there's no contradictions, and you would not probably equate a theological difference between denominations as mistaken scripture. Am I correct? So we're not confusing teaching here.
If I understand your question correct, I think the core belief in all of Christendom is the same. I think these are my opinions. Okay, I don't want to give people the idea I'm giving, book, chapter, and verse on this, but this is my opinion from experience. I think most denominations or most churches will disagree on the following things which separate us. That is how one is to be saved. That is the way we worship, and that is the church government. And I think that when you look in all of Christendom, those are the three basic things that separate us. And of course, you have your exceptions like Jehovah's Witness, who deny the deity of Jesus Christ, the Seventh-day Adventists, who also deny the deity of Jesus Christ. So you do have your exceptions that are out there, but mostly all of Christendom, though, believes the core of the faith of Christianity.
Okay. All right. Well, let's try one on for size. Let's take a little bit of time and let's talk about Judas. This was one that was brought up to me, I want to say maybe a couple weeks ago, and I know you're familiar with the story of Judas and how he ends his life. And so there is a passage, and I can bring some of the passages up here. If well, I want to bring this one up because I want the people to know what's actually there. And then we're going to look at Matthew 27, verses 3 through 8, because it talks about Judas, how his life is ended there. And then we find a passage in Acts 1:16 that seems to suggest something different happened. Now, what I'm doing tonight, y'all, is I'm posing these questions. If you have questions, go ahead, send them in the chat, and I'm going to get them to our guests. Tonight, I'm doing what I can to treat this like an interview. Ken was nice enough to come on and spend the time with us as a Church of Christ minister. And y'all know we don't get many believers on to share these things with us. So I do want to give him the respect for coming on the show and appreciate. And if y'all haven't subscribed, y'all go and do all that good stuff. Now, so as I bring up the text, I'm bringing up Matthew. I'm going to bring up Matthew 27 first. And I hope it's big enough on the screen there, Ken, so you're able to see it. Can you read that, or do I need to make the font a little bigger?
I have my own copy if I can't read that. Are you in the KJV?
I'm in the KJV, Matthew 27 at verse 3. Is it
okay?
Is
I
it,
have my own copy though.
okay. All right, cool. So if the people can see it, what it's going to say here is that then Judas, which has betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what is it to us? See thou to that. He cast down the 30 pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. Now that's what Matthew says, right? I mean, to me, that's pretty straightforward. Now I need to share. Let me change that screen over to Acts. Let's go to Acts 1:16. Okay, there it is. Make sure we're seeing that. All right, now y'all, this is another writer talking about the same thing. Best I can tell, he's talking about the same thing. He says in Luke 1, verse 16. I'm sorry, not Luke, but in Acts 1:16. Luke is just the person we think wrote it. All right, men and brethren, this scripture must needs have been fulfilled, which the Holy Ghost by the mouth of David spake before concerning Judas, which was guide to them that took Jesus. For he was numbered with us, and he had obtained part of this ministry. Still talking about Judas, Luke says, now this man purchased a field with the reward of iniquity, and falling headlong, he burst asunder in the midst, and all his bowels gushed out. And it is known unto all the dwellers at Jerusalem, and so much that the field is called in the proper tongue Adikama. I might not be saying that right. To this day, the field of blood. That's what it means. Now, I don't know if I need to point out the differences or if you kind of see where we're going with this, Ken. In one passage, it looks that Judas throws the money down and he goes out and he hangs himself. Okay, if he's hanging himself the way that we traditionally understand hanging yourself, we get to Luke's version and we find out something different happens. He falls headlong somehow. He burst open. And what else does it say? It says, I got to go back to the original screen. Give me patience. He says, this man's filled, number with us. Now it says that Judas, here in verse 18, now this man purchased a field with the reward of iniquity. And so that's another thing. And Matthew says he threw the money down and he left and he hung himself. Perhaps, if you see the issues, Ken, what reconciliation might you offer, if any, needed?
I don't see a difference in any of it at all. None at all. You point out the money. The money was used to purchase his. If you kept reading in Matthew, you see the same 13 pieces of silver was used to purchase the field, potter's field, that they buried Judas in. They called it the field of blood. And people who didn't have enough money to purchase their own, graves or to be buried, they would eventually they would use that to bury the poor in. So the money was used for that. It was Judas's money because they wouldn't take it back. And so when Luke says in the book of Acts that he purchased it, he did. It may have been done after his death, but it was still purchased with his money. Also, hanging, what they would do. Both of those describe the same hanging, just in two different ways. Matthew takes a brevity to it, but Luke gives more details to it. Tie a rope around your neck and you dive off of somewhere high. And when the rope snaps, your body, which would be head down first because you dove off, and your feet up, would then jerk and flip around. And sometimes when it happened, the body would split. His guts split open and came out. So it's the same thing. It's just two different descriptions of the same thing. He was still hanged.
So that would be your explanation, and like again, everyone, I'm asking these questions. Hopefully, Ken can give you what his best answer is as I continue to build up to some of the things that we're looking at concerning whether or not the Bible is inerrant. Before I go a little bit further, with inerrancy, also for you, Ken, would it have anything to do with the evidences that we find within scientific inquiry going against the things that we see clearly being said to have happened in the Bible, as far as it being, is that?
Now, you're in reference to miracles when you say scientific evidence. Science says you can't walk on water, but Jesus did.
Yeah. I was going back to some Old Testament stuff that we may have some evidence or the lack thereof. For instance, like Noah's flood and things of that nature, and different statements. I'm wondering, before I even go there, though, would that be included in the Bible being inerrant? If that's not included, we won't even answer.
I believe, and I'm trying to be clear here. I believe that the vast majority of science supports what the Bible says. Okay. However, Eli, and the same thing with archaeology. We can talk about that as well. God, everyone listening, if you don't get nothing else out of this, listen to what I'm telling you right now. Okay. God requires faith. He does. So science is only going to take us so far. The Bible itself is only going to take us so far. Archaeology is only going to take us so far. At the end of the day, everyone, you have to make a conscious choice to either believe or not believe. It boils down to that. So when we talk about the sciences of everything, and we look at some of even the miracles or the events that happen, that the Bible says happen, some of it is just going to simply have to be by faith. And if that's not good enough for you, there's nothing that I can do. If God himself is not going to appear and talk to us physically, which he can do, which he did in Jesus, then clearly anything that I can say here is just simply leading you to believe in him. But the ultimate choice has to be yours. Okay.
Okay.
And but wait a minute. By the way, Eli, when you talk about the flood, I think that there's more. I think there's more scientific evidence that the flood actually.
we may go into it. I just wanted to know before I go there. I'm trying to be fair and let you know whether or not I was going to even bring that in as part of the inerrancy that we're talking about here tonight, as it relates. But you bring up something interesting, and this is a conversation we can't flow. You say that God requires faith. So just so we're not on different pages, when you say God requires faith, and we're talking about this in relationship to the inerrancy of the Bible, when you say faith, what is that? Is that believing something where there may not be a scientific explanation for it, or is it just believing something you may not actually be able to provide evidence for? Is that what you mean by God requires faith?
Faith is based on evidence that takes you beyond a reasonable doubt. But faith does not necessarily have to be evidence that is, what do they say, the smoking gun, or, undeniable proof. Okay. And I think that's I really believe that's by the design of God himself. So yeah, faith, Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And so I'll give you an example of that. You want to know what the evidence of things not seen? Watch this. With all of our sciences, Eli, with all of our modern marvels, with all of our great technology, we can send a document around the world 4 times in an instant. We're sitting up here on an electronic computer talking to each other across the country. Modern medicine, they can create a disease and then create medicine, not to cure the disease, but to help you maintain the disease. We can put a man on the moon. We can, weapons that can destroy a continent or a city in an instant. We have all of that, right? But there is not one person in this world that can make one drop of rain fall from the sky. The rain is the evidence. The fact that no one can do this points to something unseen. That is, that there is a God up there. When a storm comes, with all of our modern technology and all of our strength and all our humanity, all our power, everything that we have, when a storm comes, all we can do is buckle down and get out the way. The evidence that the storm is coming and we have no control over it points to something unseen. That's our God up there. I could do this over and over and over again with things that we cannot see, but we know is absolutely there. So yeah, so now a person will say, oh, that's just science, that's just the way it is, it's evolution, it's whatever it is, and they can choose not to believe that it's God in control of those storms. Or a person can say, hey, something is up there handling this beyond what we know, and they can choose to believe that it's God. But it's all evidence pointing to something not seen.
Okay. And just in keeping with what we're talking about with the guests, I think that what you bring up is interesting, and I think that it can be brought up in the context of biblical inerrancy. The reason I say that is because now with you giving further clarification, I think I do want to ask some questions concerning Noah's flood, because you mentioned water and the rain specifically being an evidence for you. But what it sounds like, before I get to the question, are you familiar with the phrase "God of the gaps"?
No, I'm not familiar with
So,
that.
so it's used when these type of topics come up, especially in agnostic and atheist circles, because it seems to be the notion that a believer will assign God as an explanation to whatever they feel science cannot explain or has not yet properly explained to the extent that they feel it should be explained to, or something we don't know, then therefore God. In other words, you fill in the gap, no, with God. So that's what God of the gaps is. But here's where I'm going with that in relationship to biblical inerrancy. Water is interesting. I didn't know this until a while ago, and maybe you're familiar with it. That all the water we have is all the water we've ever had or will have. Water seems to be very mysterious. But this is what the science tell us. This is what the physicists and the geologists, this is what we know about where we live. So all the water that we have in this closed system, this atmosphere, this globe, is all the water there has ever been. First, let me ask you, do you know that to be the case or
Well, I
not?
know that there are different scientific theories, I think you should say. There's the conservation of mass, conservation of energy. I forget who it was off the top of my head, but there was one scientist who simply explained that, for example, energy itself never goes out of existence. It just changes from one form to the other. The same thing with mass or even with water. They never really goes. God designed the world, or the world is designed. I don't think this person was a believer in God, but the world was designed so that everything is reused. Okay. For example, I'll just give you a thought. It rains, right? That water is sinks down into the ground, helps to give vegetation photosynthesis to grow, and then we eat the grass, or the cattle eats the grass and produces milk. You know what I'm saying? So it just
Mhm.
changes from one form to another until eventually you get back to the air and precipitation, and it's created and it rains all over again. So I forgot what the question was, but
Okay, so
I'm
what
aware
I'm
of those.
getting at,
I'm aware of those theories. Yeah.
what I'm getting at, okay, so let me just tell you where I'm going. Let me tell you where I'm going, and then maybe you'll see where I'm having the issue with the Bible having perfect understanding, I guess. And I think this is an error. So in the flood narrative, we're told about the geysers or whatever in the deep, and we're told that the heavens opened up so far that the highest mountains, I believe it says this in Genesis 7, talks about so that the highest mountains were covered. And now I'm not even mentioning that it says the water only came up so many cubits, but let's just say everything was covered. I don't know. Ken, I should ask you that, because I have encountered believers that don't think the flood was a worldwide flood. Do you teach that it was a worldwide flood,
Absolutely.
like global flood?
Absolutely.
Okay, it wasn't okay. So with that being said, the amount of water it would take to flood the earth so that Mount Everest is also underwater, that this water has to go somewhere. And what we know because of our closed system is that the water doesn't go out of the system. In other words, it doesn't leave. It doesn't go go out into space. Okay, it's going to be here. We have what's called a water cycle. So the reason I'm connecting this with the Bible containing, this one won't really be a mistake, because there are people that reconcile this by teaching it as a local flood, which I started to teach before my exit, because I just don't see what you're going to do with all that water unless you call on a work of a miracle, and therefore faith, in order to keep believing that this book has a perfect narrative on the story. That's a lot of water. It didn't go anywhere. None of our water goes, and when we have droughts, the sun hits it, evaporates, it's up in the clouds. or it's underwater and contaminated. We only have so much water here on Earth. That's why there's no new water being added to the system. How do you reconcile that scientific knowledge with the Bible coming from a perfect, all-knowing being who supposedly knows how this works? What do you say to that?
You wash dishes?
Yeah,
You do? Okay. I forgot to ask you, if you don't mind me asking, are you married?
I used to be. I'm divorced.
I am too. Okay. All right. Who am I to judge? I just wanted to know, for personal reasons. So being home alone, you wash dishes, right?
Right.
Right. Okay. So you ever put a dish in the sink and you put it in there, you can see it because it's sitting on top of the water.
Right.
You ever come back and it's on the bottom of it?
Yeah.
It's on the bottom of the sink. Did the amount of water
Right.
on the bottom of the sink, did the amount of water in the sink change?
Nope. Water
It
did
did.
not change.
That's right.
Nope.
You ever reach down in there and pull the dish back up on top of the water?
Right.
But the amount of the water didn't change. Are you aware that our continents float?
Mm-hmm.
You aware our continents float?
Continental drift. Yeah.
Okay. Can I, if I hit this present button, can I share my screen?
Yeah, I think you can. Let me remove what I had. Stop sharing that, and I should be able to see what you send.
I just want to share. I got two screens up here. I just want to see if I can share one. Let me know when it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead and hit the button. We should be able to. It should show me.
I want to share screen. I want to. Let's see here. Two monitors. I'm sorry. Sharing the screen. Okay.
While you're getting that, let me just tell everybody, y'all go ahead. While we're getting that together for the share screen, y'all go ahead and get your questions that you want to put into Ken. We have a Church of Christ minister with us this evening. He was gracious
Here we
enough
go.
to come on and give his time. And so y'all continue to do that and support the platform. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to add that to the screen. There we go. Can you see it on the screen, Ken?
Can you see?
Okay.
Can you see these curves right here? See that curve right there? See
Right.
that line? If I was to draw a line, you see that?
Right.
You see that? Can you see that Brazil right here fits pretty well right there?
Absolutely.
And this curve right here fits pretty well right here. And can you see that? It's pretty clear when you look at this that these continents used to be together.
Right.
And now they have been broken apart. That's pretty obvious. Okay, do you know what it would take to break these continents apart like that? It would take a world flood, is what it would take. These continents have been separated like this. People ask me all the time if the people of God were, where are we looking at? Right over here, okay? But somehow or another, people ended up over here. Up here in Alaska, somewhere over here, up here in Alaska and all this is where we get our Eskimos and Mayans and all that kind of stuff over here. How did they get across there? They didn't have boats good enough to sail that far. They didn't have planes back there because it used to be one continent. The flood broke this up. And when it broke up people on this side and on that side. So that's the scientific evidence that I have for it. Yeah, and God has just like the dish in the sink. God could have easily raised up enough water to where these continents sank, and then push the water back again, so that without removing any water, He could have easily done that. He's the Lord.
So in your view, what the Bible says is still correct because you think that the continents sunk underwater and came back out and at some point split.
I believe that's every bit as possible, especially when we can do it in our own sinks and bathtubs and rivers and lakes and ponds. I think it's every bit as possible. I can even use the example of a dam. Build a dam and raise the water levels up behind the dam temporarily until you let the dam go. Absolutely.
Well, I could go. I could go. Emma, let's discuss this out for a little while. We're just 9 minutes before 8, and maybe some folk. There are some questions I did start, and then maybe there are some folk that want to come on. But let's continue on this because I think it's interesting. Point of conversation with us. So when you say it's possible that it was pushed or kind of sunk down, and then came back out. I don't know at which point would it have broken up and started to drift. Question.
It's a theory, Elijah. I wasn't there, man. It's a theory.
Well, okay, yeah, right. My bad.
The point that I'm making out is when you look at where the continents are now, it clearly looks like they should have.
I agree. I agree. Continental.
The flood is just as reasonable of an explanation as to how they got separated as anything anybody else could give.
Okay, so and that would be at least your thought on why there doesn't have to be extra water added to the system for Mount Everest to end up underwater. Is that kind of your thing?
Yeah, I don't believe. Yeah, no, I don't believe that. I believe that. Okay, watch this. If we hold to the theory of conservation of mass and energy, if we hold to that theory, you can leave a glass of water outside on the sidewalk underneath the hot sun. I grew up in Bakersfield, California, which is just outside of Death Valley and the Mojave Desert. You leave that water out there long enough and that water will evaporate, will it not?
Of course.
Okay, but did we make the water disappear, or does it still exist?
It still exists.
Okay, so how and if God makes it rain and I leave that same glass out there, you can fill that glass back up. So how come he couldn't do the same with the world? How come he couldn't rain and make the water levels rise and then make the sun come out and evaporate and the water goes back into mist in there? I wasn't there. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm just saying it's as good a theory as any other.
Okay, well, and not being a scientist on this or a geologist or anything like that, but when I did look at there were I would need to ask some further questions to see if this is even a problem of what you're bringing up. So are you also one of the individuals or a theologian that would say that this earth is, I shouldn't say earth, I should say that human history only goes back a little over 6,000 to 10,000 years? Is that also your perception? And I'm coming from the time of Adam.
Somewhere in there, if depending upon who's doing the timeline, we have no way of really knowing, Eli, because there's so much of scripture that tells us the stories but doesn't give us a timeline. But we have no idea how long Adam and Eve were in the garden before they had a child.
But if the Bible didn't, if the Bible is perfect, and if it's not inerrant, it's perfect. Am I okay in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So if the Bible is perfect, and we're talking about literal times and years, if a year is a year, as far as how old Adam is when he dies, then it should be safe to say at the point when Adam dies, the earth is 6 days older than him. So at the point when Adam dies, I think he dies at 930. At the point when Adam dies, the earth was supposed to be about 930 years old plus 6 days. And if we do that, then the Bible is only going to allow us to have so much time. Going back to the issue of continental drift, with that, again, not being a scientist, but what I understand is that continental drift, it happens at such a slow rate, and for it to happen at a quick rate that would work within those amount of years, we have what's called a heat problem. Because you mentioned, I think it was Newton, came up with those laws of energy and laws of conservation.
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was.
And Newton was Newton. I think he was a scientist, but he was a believer in he was a believer. But in these laws, what we find out is the movement of those tectonic plates at that amount of speed basically destroys the earth. We melt. Now that is coming from, again, not being a scientist. I am putting that out there in the community. I'm not saying that I'm giving a good rebuttal, because I can't explain the heat argument that does rebut what Mr. Olison or what Ken has said here. I'm just saying we should look into the science, because you and I are not scientists. So your explanation for Noah's flood was one that I think that you were thinking through, and it made sense to you. But I think what science is telling us some other things. That's why we're even asking this question: is the Bible inerrant? Because when we look at some of the claims of the Bible as it relates to science, it seems like some of this stuff it wouldn't be the case. A whole lot of it. I could go on to the Bible being inerrant when it said that in Joshua. You remember Joshua prays for the sun to stand still. Well, if Joshua is right, it would seem that the sun is going around the earth, right? And from our perspective of being here on the earth, that's what it looks like. But since then, we've developed instruments and gone a little further, and it seems that that's not quite what's happening. So, on the question of the Bible being inerrant, it seems like science is in direct conflict with this. Would you say, at least in that example? How do you
Well,
reconcile Joshua?
no, not at all. Your scientific theory that you quoted from Darwin, that if the continents had moved at that rate, it would cause heat, or the world would burn up or something like that, is merely a theory. You can't prove it. It's a theory. Okay. There are a whole lot of scientific theories. I was given my theory. That's why I was telling you. Look, man, it's a theory. It could have. It explains it just as well as anything else. But I wasn't there. I don't know for certain. I do know that the way the continents are lined up right now, it looked like they used to be together. Okay,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know
no,
that.
I
Okay.
agree with Pangea. I think there's science for it. I mean, no doubt. Let me give you something else that the earth is imaginably old from my research, and some of these mountains, we know how they became mountains. Like when we look at the Himalayas, and when you look at the area around Mount Ararat, these land masses, colliding together and upheaving the earth, coming up like this here. That's what we find. The only thing is that it takes so long for that to happen, over probably bajillion years, man. Just a long time from looking at some of these what these scientists have gone out and discovered. And I'm careful when I use the word theory, because I think our lay people, we use the word theory as if it's just something, we thought of and it made sense in our mind. But these scientists, it's a lot more strict to that. Before something can become a theory, you got all the tests that have to happen at different points in time by different scientists elsewhere. Your work has to be verified. It's not like you and I sitting here talking like, maybe this could have happened. Our scientists don't do that. They go out there, they get their hands dirty, and they publish the material to back it up. But what I want to get into some of the questions. We are at
Can,
8 o'clock.
can I respond to what you
Yeah,
just
yeah,
said
go ahead.
there? Okay.
Mhm.
Actually, Eli, a theory is just that. It's when uh, a person, uh, a scientist, someone who has education concerning these things, that's just what he does. He hypothesizes a theory based on information or knowledge that he has studied. Now, what our universities do is they will take such a scientist who is considered to have a certain amount of education and knowledge, or to be a brilliant mind, or so forth, and they will fund that scientist. Now, what are they funding? They're funding his research. What is he trying to do with his research? He is trying to prove his theory. I'll give you an example. There's one such theory out there that's known as string theory, and this hypothesizes that there are multiple universes, and they are all connected together by a string of energy. And if we can find this physical evidence of this string of energy, then we would be able to travel through wormholes from one world to another. Now, that currently is a theory based on a hypothesis, but no one as of yet has been able to prove that theory to be true. Okay, so going back to Darwin saying that if the continents moved at a certain speed, it would burn up the earth or would create so much heat and so forth, that's a theory that has not been proven, nor will they ever prove it unless they can move the continents at a much faster rate than what they're moving right now. So it's just a theory. Second thing I wanted to address was the age of the earth. You're right. By looking at certain amount of data in the Bible, we can only trace back so many thousands of years. I think the furthest back was about 10,000 years. But here is what we don't understand, or what we often miss or forget. When you look, archaeology takes a look at some of these boulders and some of these rocks. They determine that they're millions of years old, and maybe by the age or the anatomy of that rock, it is a million years old. So how do you account for the differences? We believe that God created the earth full grown, very much the same way that he created Adam and Eve as adults or young adults. You know, even if they were 15 or 16 years old, I think they were somewhere between 20 and 25. But even if they were 15 or 16 years old, if we ever discovered their bones, no one would say that Adam was 1 minute old by his bone structure. You look at his bones, he was created full grown. So they would say this person was, at 15, if he was created and died right away and they found his bones immediately, they would say this person was 15, 16, 20 years old, however old, you could hypothesize about his age being. That's what they would say. Same way when we look at the earth was created by God. It wasn't evolutionized by God. The Bible doesn't tell us that the earth started with an amoeba and developed over thousands of years. It says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He spoke them into existence. He spoke them into existence into a point where we could start living on this earth. So he created the earth full grown. That's why archaeology would say it's millions of years old, and the Bible timeline would say, yeah, it's only 10,000 years old.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I was gonna read some on theory, but I want to go to the questions because I want to give some more time to this. Some of these were written in the form of some statements, so I'm going to do the best I can to possibly put it into a question. Let's do this one here. Says most peasants and other classes didn't know how to read during that time period unless one was in a position, say like Matthew, a tax collector. So what this individual, I think what she's getting at is in relationship to our show, and I'll talk with it later. Dewana, you correct me if I'm not representing this right, because I'm trying to piece it together. You have most people in that day and time, first century, that were illiterate. Theirs was probably in reverse. There are some scholars, a number of scholars that said that literacy was right around 3% at that day and time. Somebody like Josephus would have been able to read and write, being in the upper parts of society. But people that hung around where Jesus was, lay people that probably would have been more like me and you, wouldn't have been able to read. So I think the question is related to how how are you trusting what's being said to you if it only came from one group, that elite group? I guess why do you feel that this was something accessible to the lay people? And that's the best I can do. I'm just trying to make that a question. I'm
I
sorry.
think her question comes back to my statements that I made at the top of the hour, in that the Bible is very unique. You can't compare it to any other book. And the evidence that I gave for that, I said that it was written over a 1,500-year period, over 40 generations, 40 different authors from all different walks of life. Some were kings, some were peasants, some were philosophers, some were fishermen, some were poets, some were statesmen, some were scholars. You know, there's no other, name another book. Name another book in existence in the world that was written over a 1,500-year span, 40 generations, 40 authors. But I did mention in there that some writers were peasants. And I think her rebuttal was that peasants, not a lot of peasants could write, which I agree with back in the day. Not a lot of peasants could write. But we're not dealing with a lot of peasants. We're dealing with a few that could. And just so happens there were some that could, and some that penned the book of the Bible. You know, if I may finish here though, but when you look at it though, Elijah, that's one of the evidences that just blows my mind. No other book is like that. You can't find another book that was written over 1,500 years, 40 generations, 40 different authors from all walks of life who did not know each other and yet still did not contradict each other in doctrine and theology or walks of life. That's amazing.
Well, see that I think it's amazing to you because you believe what you just said. You believe that the evidence supports that for you. Because I used to preach that too. I remember preaching that same thing about 40
It's
authors.
amazing because you can't find another book like it. Look, if you look at all of the books in antiquity, are you aware that of the Bible, of all of the copies, manuscripts, and versions, we have well over 10,000 of them? Name another book in antiquity that even comes close to having that many manuscripts.
You talking about manuscripts? Well, why would you? I mean, that makes sense because it's Christian, and then you have the monks that are employed to just copy. You don't see that happen in a lot of places, especially when you read things like what Bart Ehrman says about the triumph of Christianity. It makes sense that you would have a book and this many manuscripts because that's what people do. They were sitting there copying books. This was religion. Some other places since then have not been like that. One of the, and before I go into it, I want to put this up because it was a question. It's kind of related to one of the viewers, and I'm catering to my viewers. Joanne said, our Kemetic, and she's talking about the Egyptian legacy, has some of the same creation story written thousands of years before the Bible. And so she's talking about you have things such as Kum, the Egyptian depiction of this energy or God, if you want to call it a god, of a ram fashioning man on a potter's wheel. You have even when there's different stories, that story of the earth being without form and void and the dark waters of chaos being a thing, and then so these similarities within the creation story, according to her, can be found elsewhere. But I want you to interact with the statement / question for the sake of the guest.
Okay, so you want me to address that right there?
Yes, sir.
What Miss Joanne just said?
Yes.
Okay, all right, sure, not a problem at all. The first person that recorded the creation story was Moses. The people of Israel, God's people, they were known for having ceremonies in which they told the stories of their God from generation to generation long before Moses was born. That was how they knew. That was how they remembered what God did for them. Just so happens that the Israelites ended up in Egypt for 400 years. And just like the Israelites began to adopt the Egyptian gods and worship them, then the Egyptians began to adopt the stories of Israel. And so, yeah, you're going to see before Moses penned the book of Genesis after they left Egypt, then there would be hieroglyphics or stories or things that were integrated into the Egyptian culture because the Hebrews lived with them and told those stories for 400 years.
The question, you when you say the Hebrews, can you tell me what Pharaoh were they under? The Hebrews.
They lived there.
Yeah,
I would
what
say the
Pharaoh
Pharaoh
was
they were
ruling?
under. Yeah, they were under Ramesses for a while.
Ramses. Okay.
Yeah, I know they were under. I know Ramesses was one of the sons. I don't know them all off the top of my head, Elijah.
Okay.
But the Bible identifies some of them.
Okay.
I know Ramesses
Okay.
for certain because I know the story of Moses.
Okay, but I don't think that the Bible names him. I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure. I don't think that the Bible names the Pharaoh, and so that I think that was
Yeah,
the issue.
Ramesses. You talking about Ramesses' father?
Whomever the Pharaoh is in the Bible, it doesn't say who it is.
Well, okay. Let me back up for just a minute. There were a lot of pharaohs. Egypt is one of the oldest societies that we have evidence of existing. There were a lot of them. Now, there was one that knew Joseph. Joseph was sold into slavery and he ends up down there into Egypt. I don't recall his name. I don't know if the Bible mentions his name because all of them are mentioned. But the Bible says a new Pharaoh arose that did not know Joseph. Now, I know you know that story, right?
Right.
Okay. And I believe that Pharaoh's son was Ramesses. And I think that's the only one that I actually know. But
okay. Well, and I don't think that it does. We can look at it, or we'll have the chat. They go on. So like on Facebook, if y'all are in Facebook, y'all can see this. If we you can continue on in the chat, but I don't think that it does. Here's a question from Joe Smith. I'm gonna put it on the screen. He says, "Can the pastor answer why Egyptian history does not record an Exodus?" And I think that's plain just the way he wrote it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know per se, but I can tell you this: Pharaoh and all of the Egyptian army was destroyed in the Exodus process. Now, why others who lived past that didn't actually record it, I don't know. I wasn't there. No, I don't. I can tell you why Ramesses didn't record it. He was dead. His whole army.
Okay, and Joe, you've heard the answer. Let me see. The answer to your question. Let me see if I can find. Y'all bear with me because I'm having to put y'all's statements in forms of questions. Give me a second here. Let me take some off because I'm looking at a few different screens. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. Take that off. All right. Let's go to the gospel because I actually had a question there when we're talking about the inerrancy. I'll put this up on the screen, and for the sake of time, and I'll bring it up if we need to, but I'll try to talk about it first. But this person says they don't agree with you, Kim. So they're saying this is a pathetic claim. The New Testament has 4 gospels that was written within a few years, and they contradict each other without even adding Pauline letters. Now, this person is saying that they contradict each other. I want to bring up something I brought up on the show a little while ago, and I know that you will be careful to be hermeneutical in your approach to this, understanding what it means to eisegete a text rather than exegete. Eisegete meaning to read into the text what is not there. Exegete meaning only to pull out of the text what you can actually what's actually there, what you can actually get. And so I bring that up, and I'm thinking about the thieves on the cross. Okay. And you may be familiar with where I'm going, because I told everybody I think this is a small contradiction, but we're talking about a book that is supposed to be inerrant. So there shouldn't be any contradiction. So the Bible has a high standard, and I think that it should, because the claim is that it came from a deity. So I hope you agree with me so far. It should have a high standard if it, in fact, did come from a deity. So I think it's Matthew. Matthew says, Matthew and Mark, they seem to say the same thing. I don't even think John mentions the two thieves. But while Matthew and Mark agree that both thieves mock Jesus, Matthew and Mark say they both cast the same at his teeth. It uses language that includes both of the thieves in the act of railing on
In
Jesus.
what passage is that?
Okay, let me go ahead and go to it. I'll bring them up. I was gonna just talk about it.
I just preached
Well,
on the thief yesterday.
oh, okay. Well, good. Well,
Yeah.
let's first go to the, let me see, the passage in Matthew, and let's do this. Let me get to the right chapter here. I thought I was. Give me a second. Scroll down. I'm scrolling down to the verse here. Way down. Okay. Way down. That's a long chapter. Chapter 2. I'm in Matthew 26, by the way.
26.
Okay. Yeah. I can never remember numbers. So, all right. I'm trying to scroll down so we get.
I preached it.
No, I need to go to 27. I need to go to 27. My bad. Okay, Jesus is marked. Here we go. Go to Matthew 27 and let's scroll down to about verse. Let's scroll down to about verse 27.
Mm-hmm.
Let me find the passage. Mark 10. Okay.
27. He's still in the hall with the
No, yeah,
with the
I'm
soda.
reading down. I'm just double checking before I bring it up on screen. I'm at 33 now. I'm just scanning down. It's hit. Yeah, right. All right. Now I'm in 38. Let me start. I'm gonna share my screen now. Now that I think I've got it. So you can take a look at what I'm talking about here. Here it is. All right. And I need to get another tab ready. Give me a second. I didn't wasn't sure if we were going to get to these passages. That's why I didn't have them already queued up, in case y'all are wondering. All right, Jesus for Pilate. Let me do. Just getting the other passage ready so we can see the difference back to back. All right. All right. In Matthew, it says, in verse 38, Matthew 27:38, it says, then there were two thieves crucified with him. Can you hear me, Ken?
I hear you. Listen.
Okay, two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand and one on the left, right? And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads, and saying, thou that destroyest the temple, buildest it back up in 3 days. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross. Okay. Likewise, the chief priests mocking with him, and the scribes and the elders said, he saved others. Can he not save himself? If he be king of Israel, let him come down off the cross, and we will believe him. Verse 43, he trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if he will have him, for he said, I am the Son of God. Then here's the other key verse right here, Ken. Verse 44. It says, the thieves, still plural, also which were crucified with him cast the same at his teeth. So would you agree that the thieves are, that is, at least so far what I've read, it gives the understanding that these thieves railed on Jesus too.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, I'm
Then you
just
go
gonna
to
keep
Luke.
reading.
Are you looking at Luke 23 then? Go to Luke
I
23.
yeah, well, I was going to read a little bit more. 27. It says that these also, which were casting. Okay, then it just goes into the hour. Okay, and then I wanted to note on Matthew that as we continue down, after Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of them stood there thinking he was calling for Elias. It says, straightway, one of them took a sponge, filled it. My point in continuing through here, and I'm going to come to another passage in verse 53. Maybe we'll talk about it. My point in continuing through is that I don't see at any point in Matthew, okay, or in Mark, where we also read this, I don't see any point before we get to Luke where either one of those thieves has a change of heart. Now, let me read Luke 23. Luke 23 in verse 32. Now, let me make sure I'm sharing that. I'm not sharing that one. Hold on. Let me bring it up on the screen. 1 second. That's Luke 23. Okay, let me know when that's up on your screen.
So,
Okay, Luke 23. Okay, Luke 23 and verse 32, it says, "And there were also 2 other malefactors led with him to be put to death." Okay, and when they were come to a place which is called Calvary, there crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right, one on the left. That sounds a lot to me like the 2 thieves. Going further, it says, Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And they parted his raiment, cast lots, and the people stood beholding, and the rulers also derailed him. He saved others. It sounds a lot like the other passage so far. And the soldiers mocked him, coming to him, verse 37, and saying, "If y'all be the king of the Jews, save yourself." They talk about the superscription above his head. They're written in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. And then in verse 39, it says, "And one of the malefactors, which were hanged, railed on him, saying, If thou be Christ, save thyself and us. But the other answered, rebuked him, saying, Dost thou not fear God, seeing thou art in the same condition?" Verse 41, "And we indeed justly, for we receive due reward for our deeds, but this man hath done nothing." Jesus, remember me when you come to the kingdom, you know the story, and so on and so forth. So now, I know it's been long, but thank y'all for being patient while we get this context and some understanding. Kim, what I'm mainly looking at when I look at this passage is I'm looking at Matthew, Mark say 2 thieves mocked Jesus. I look at Luke, say 2 thieves were crucified with Jesus, but only one of them derailed or made fun of him in our daily vernacular. Only one of them made fun. And Matthew and Mark, it gives no distinction. Both of them did it. In Luke, it doesn't say that one of them, they both started off and then one goes and says something, or else I wouldn't even be bringing this passage up. But Luke just straight up says one made fun of him. One of them said, "Hey man, stop talking like that. We deserve what we getting. But Jesus, remember me when you come into thy kingdom." As small as it is, Ken, I think we have a discrepancy here. What do you see?
all right. And Elijah, I want to tell you before I answer this question, I really appreciate this dialogue. The reason why I want everybody here to understand this, I agreed to come on here with Elijah, and my criteria for coming was that we would not insult one another, but that we would be respectful of one another. We are having a very good dialogue. I have no, didn't have before I came on here any delusions about trying to change Elijah's mind. Maybe some of you that are listening, or maybe people who will listen to this later on, will hear some of the things that I'm saying. But during the discussion, though, he's been very, very respectful. And people out there, when you discuss the Bible with others, you can do that without attacking the intelligence or the character or the knowledge or the experience or the motives of the person you're talking to. You don't have to do that. Just stick with your point and make your point without addressing or insulting the others. So I appreciate that, Elijah. I want to thank you that. I want to thank you for that.
You're
right.
welcome. Thank you.
And now, Elijah, you ever told a story or recounted a memory or had an argument with your ex-wife, then your present wife, and while doing it, you emphasize certain things to make a point? Is that, you ever done that before? But the next time you talked about that same experience, you didn't tell it quite the same. You emphasized different things because you're emphasizing a different point. Are you familiar? Has that ever happened to you before?
Yes.
Okay, exactly. I remember sometimes arguing with my ex-wife, and she would say, "Last time you said," I'd be like, "Well, that did happen, but we're not talking about that right now. I'm emphasizing something else." Okay. Matthew wrote his gospel by the inspiration of God to the Jews, and he was trying to convert Jewish individuals. That was his purpose of it. So when he recounts the story, those are the emphasis that he makes. The thieves on the cross are mentioned, but they are not explained in Matthew's account because it wasn't necessary for him to explain them to the audience that he was targeting. Luke writes at the beginning of his message, he says, "I want to start this treaty from the beginning and put these events in order." So Luke then sets out to write a more comprehensive or a more detailed explanation of the things that happen. Now, no matter which position you take, you're not getting a moment by moment, a second by second, or moment by moment explanation of what's going on. You can't do that. I'm a writer. I'm an author. I have published books. I've got one coming out soon. And you cannot, even in fiction, you cannot simply go back and say moment by moment, second by second. So what God has done for us is he has put together 4 gospels. There were arguably more gospels than that, but like the Gospel of Thomas and so forth, that we don't have copies of. So what we do is we compare the synoptic gospels along with the Gospel of John to give us a holistic picture of what's happened. What probably I wasn't there. I was not there, you guys. But if I can take what I'm reading from all of these and put them together, both these probably railed on Jesus at first. And at some point or another, while hanging there, one had a change of heart. But it doesn't mean that there's a contradiction just because one gospel is emphasizing one point more than another is. You get a holistic picture if you put them together.
That's interesting. As I thought, that would come out, the whole change of heart thing. Let me see if I can, before I move on, and I want to put forth a comment and a question that Gasper Roberts has put in. Gasper, I have started. I'm coming back to what you posted last, but here's where I've had an issue. So I started off by talking about eisegesis and exegesis, and you also explained that the purpose was different between these different books. Um, and the issue that I'm getting at is because when you talk about a play-by-play, you said that Luke wanted to put some events in order, but he never talks about the thief having a change of heart. You know, even if I were to accept what you were saying, if Luke is, let's say Matthew and Mark are telling kind of a story of purpose, but Luke says, I want to be, you know, chronological and orderly of how this thing happens. It would seem to me that if that is the case, then you would include that both thieves mocked him, but one, you know, had a change of heart. That's all it would have taken. But Luke does not say that. Luke says there were two crucified and one of them railed on him. To me, that's a very specific statement that Luke is making, and he says that he's trying in the beginning of his book. He's trying to give. I think he said a more perfect understanding or something he uses to indicate he really was meticulous in his gathering of this said information. So I would ask you to at least want to know, do you see where I'm coming from? I'm going to give you what Gaspar says here.
You're simply saying if he wanted to give a more accurate explanation, he would have included this so-called idea that one thief was first had one kind of heart and then changed that heart.
Right.
That's what you're saying. Maybe not.
I'm saying we don't see a change between Matthew and Mark. Like Matthew and Mark doesn't show a change of mind, just says both of the thieves mocked him. Then Luke doesn't show a change of mind. He just says one of the thieves mocked him.
No, because it's very well. If you don't eisegete and you just take what's written, you have one that simply says both of them railed on him. Then you have another that says, but one confessed him. Okay, that's not a contradiction necessarily. You can easily see where people at one point they have this kind of heart, and then later on they have a different kind of heart. Okay, so how about this then for a contradiction? Then you have Demas. In one passage, Paul counts Demas as faithful, but in another passage, Paul says Demas has forsaken me. That can't you then imply or infer that Demas was this way at one point in his life and then another way at another point in his life? Or do you just simply
you could? No, you absolutely could. That would be two different incidents, not the same incident. We're talking about on the cross, exact same incident.
So you're talking about on the cross, they were hanging on the cross for 5 minutes. For 60
well, when I used to preach, they were on the cross a lot longer than that.
That's lot longer than that. So you're telling me that wait, you telling me that a man at the beginning of his death has to have the same exact heart at the end of his death? We're hypothesizing again. You know that, right?
Well, I'm just going off what you say an inerrant work of God, this Bible, gave me. And if it's inerrant, the only reason that I say that it is because you have different writers. Had Luke been the only gospel written, or the other one said what he said, then we wouldn't have a contradiction. But because we have four, and notice I didn't even mention John, because John just says nothing about these two thieves. That's not John's thing or whatever. But Gaspar said this. I wanna put forth to you what the way he said it. I'm gonna put it on the screen here. It's slightly a question than somewhat of a statement. He says, "Wow, your God can't give a moment by moment account of his son on earth. That God is so limited." So when you were talking about, I think he's referring to when you were talking about how Luke wanted to give a step by step, but Matthew was more in tune to just giving the Jewish audience what they need, and maybe Mark wanted to hit it real quick for his Roman audience, so he had the shorter version of the gospel. So Gaspar is saying we're dealing with all powerful here. Why would it have been so hard to
This
give an account?
in logic, this is what we would call a red herring. He's attacking the limitations of, saying that I put limitations on an all-powerful God. That would be a red herring. No one said God can't. No one said that. John writes, many other things did Jesus. So many that all the books of the world cannot contain them. Obviously, who is it, Gaspar? I'm sorry, I don't mean to mispronounce your name.
I think it's Gaspar.
Okay, Roberts, yeah. Obviously, Gaspar Roberts has never really written anything or put together, a complete story. If you do that, even when they're creating television, if you do that, God can, sure he can, okay? But if you do that, you're going to be writing chapters, eons of chapters over one single moment, over 1 minute. Okay, no one's going to read that. No one is going to go through every single thought process, second by second by second. No one's going to read that. It's not that God can't do it, but it's not efficient. Okay, when we write, even when you read, when you watch stuff on television, time is condensed. And the same thing has to go when you're recounting these stories. Even when we verbally tell the stories, we must condense the time that is spent there. So no, it's not about the limitation of God. God did it efficiently and well enough. He did it to make a point. The Bible is very concise and very efficient to the point that's trying to be made, and not to answer everyone who would criticize or find fault with anything that was written. That's not the point of it. Anyone who sits back and reads these gospels and accounts the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, it was written to cause faith in him. Okay, so somebody who doesn't want to have faith in him, any person, I'm not picking at Elijah or anyone in the chat, but anyone who doesn't want to, they want to go through and nitpick at every portion of the story, like a defense attorney. Okay, so you can have video. Y'all remember Rodney King? I'll be finishing just a minute. Y'all remember Rodney King? Does anybody old enough to remember?
Yeah, I remember that.
Officers beat him. Okay, did you
Right.
watch defense attorneys? They slowed that video down inch by inch to try and show that the motives of those officers was not to beat the heck out of that man. Anybody who clearly saw that was police abuse, police brutality. Okay, but when you nitpick at every moment, at every individual thing, you can pick it apart and make it believe whatever you want. So when you take a look at holistically at the Gospels, Jesus was crucified between two thieves, and one of them at least railed on him and repented, confessed him. So that's there. Now you don't have to believe that, but that's there, and that's the point of it.
Okay, and I wanna get to something. This is an interesting talk, and I appreciate your time, Ken. Wanted to ask. I wanted to ask this. So Matthew,
boy,
if you
over there, he tripping. It's
yeah,
funny. So your God can't. Okay, well, you tell me what my God can't do. Go ahead.
Okay, well, when we get into Matthew and Mark, I mean, I don't agree with the names of who that, but is it your understanding that when we say Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, that it's the same Matthew that was a disciple that
Absolutely.
had penmanship? Oh, okay, all right. So he would have been there, at least in your view, he would have been there. But Luke is slightly different, and I just think while I have somebody of your stature here, that I ought to ask this question. Since Luke was not a contemporary of Jesus, he came along much longer. Are you familiar with what happened in Gethsemane? I mean, I could go there, but for the sake of time, I just wanted to say it. You remember the Garden of Gethsemane? It says that after they had this supper, right? Luke says he went out with Peter, James, and John, right? And then it says that he told them, wait right there, wait right there for me. And it says Jesus goes like a stone's throw away, so about as far as you could throw a stone, whatever that would be. And he starts to pray. Now, and I know you're familiar with the story, right?
Mhm, sure.
Yeah, of course you are. So he's praying, and at some point, Peter, James, and John, who are stones throw away, fall asleep. Okay. And then we proceed to read the rest of this narrative, that he besought the Lord that this cup pass from him, and as he was praying, his sweat became, as it were, great drops of blood. And then there appeared unto him an angel strengthening him. I'm not reading this, I'm just going off the top of my head. And there appeared unto him an angel strengthening him. And then he got up from where he was, he goes back, he finds them sleeping. He said, could you not watch for me, a little while? But my point is this, Ken, and we're talking about the inerrancy of the Bible. How did Luke get those details if he was not there and the
Inspiration.
other three fell asleep? I
Inspiration of
mean,
God.
this man tells us that what Jesus is sweat. He describes hemohydrosis. And you call this inspiration. So I'm glad. Can,
All
can can you
scripture,
tell us what that is? What is that?
all
Tell us
scripture
what
is
that is.
inspired of God. God talked to Luke and told him. That's how he knew. That's how any of them knew. Even those who were there, God talked to them when they wrote it and told them what to say.
Okay.
I'm done.
So
That's simply,
it's your
simply
no.
it. God
Well,
talked to them and told them.
I want to still learn.
Yeah.
So it is your understanding that even though Luke was not present, he hadn't even been born yet, more than likely, when this stuff was taking place, but he was able to tell us through inspiration that Jesus' body became stressed to the point where he suffered from hemohydrosis, where his capillaries break and sleep into his sweat glands. So he literally sweated blood. You're saying inspiration. Can you tell us a little bit more, or provide for us some type of evidence of this inspiration, or what is it? How does Yahweh, how does he use inspiration? How does it work?
I would have to be God to give you those kind of details. From what we understand, the Bible says is that God spoke to them and told them. That would be inspiration. Simple as that. From what we know of the and trust me, everyone, anything you know about God comes from the Bible that you deny is inspired of God. Anything you know. How do you know there was an Adam and Eve? Bible told you so. How do you know there was a flood? Bible told you so. How do you know there is a heaven? Bible told you so. How do you know there is a hell? The Bible told you so. How do you know there are spirits? Bible told you so. How do you know there are angels? The Bible told you so. Anything that you can come up with, your knowledge about God comes out of the Holy Bible. You would not know that there was an Adam or an Eve. You would not know that there was a King David. You would not know that you wouldn't know anything. And then watch this. When you compare the dates, the times, the places, the names of the people that antiquity and history records, the Bible is spot on with all of them. You know why? Because God told it so. So you want to know Moses, he wasn't there at creation. How was he able to write it? How was he able to know? Because God told him what happened at creation. Moses was not there during the Garden of Eden. Moses was not there during. Come on now, how do you know? Because God told him, he wrote it. We believe it. As simple as that.
So this writing this book, you said it was efficient, and that God was doing it for this reason. I'm just pressing you on some of the things you said. But if he's so efficient, why do we need 4 gospel writers to tell us the same story?
I'm sorry, what now? Say it again. I'm sorry, I was reading fast.
You said efficient, that he was doing things with a purpose. When I brought up the thief, that he was putting the Bible in a position to tell the stories the way it's because you mentioned efficiency, and that kind of struck me because here we are with 4 writers talking about the same story, and we're calling it efficient when in fact what we all seem to do, that are trying, people at least that are trying to reconcile these stories, they end up making their own gospel. Like I pointed out, that small difference between the thieves, but we have to get that one thief to have a change of heart. He has to have it in order for the story to be talking about the same individuals and not contain a contradiction. So what I'm saying is, if it's so efficient, why do we need 4 writers? We could just have the words we have and have these explanations. It only take, maybe, I don't know how many different, we still probably wouldn't believe it because of the miracles, but it wouldn't take much to make these stories at least flow correctly without contradictions. It
They already
really
do
wouldn't
flow
take much.
correctly. Yeah, they already do flow correctly without contradiction. As a matter of fact, there are letters that we have evidence that existed that we don't have in hand. So to answer your question, when God told the story to the Israelites through Matthew, he efficiently dealt with certain things he wanted them to know. When John writes, when God tells his story through the inspiration by inspiring John to write, John was writing to people of all walks of life, not just the Jews, but of all walks of life who did not believe. John tells us, and it said, these things are written that you may believe. Okay. So you're saying then that we ought to have one long gospel that addresses every single point of every single person
It wouldn't be that
whoever
long.
will exist in life, and there ought to be no, that's not what the Lord did. What the Lord did was he said, look, here's enough evidence for anybody who is sincere to believe in me. Here it is. Okay, it's enough. It's not too little. It's efficient. It's not too much. Read it, understand it, and know who he is. And if you don't want to, he's not going to make you. He will see you one day, but he sure ain't going to make you believe. For it is not God's purpose to make soldiers follow him without any free will. He wants us to choose him. That's what he wants. You don't want choosing? You want to deny his existence? You want to deny that the Bible is his word of God? Be my guest. But every tongue shall confess and every knee shall bow at the name of Jesus Christ. We all have appointment with death. It is appointed unto man wants to die, and after this, the judgment. You better believe an answer's coming. You better believe you're going to be asking yourself one day.
I want to, in the last 10 minutes, under this topic of is the Bible inerrant, and we've been going back and forth on some different things. Something that's very important for whether or not it's inerrant that you bring up is this question of inspiration. So I'm hoping in the last 10 minutes we could do some discussion on that. So you mentioned that God inspired this book. I want to go back to, can you give us, tell us what does it look like when you say God inspired it? What does that look like? What is inspiration? And how do you know? And I'm not debating whether or not the God of the Bible exists at this moment, but how do you know that God gave this to anybody or to them specifically? Is that a matter of your faith, or do you have evidence to support your belief?
It's a matter of faith. How can you prove that God talked to a man? How can you prove that? God works Eli, God works in the world right today. Okay, evidence is there. As I said earlier, not one of us can make a drop of rain fall from the sky. Somebody put in the comments, where's this guy been? You can seed a cloud. You got to have a cloud in order to seed it. And if such is the case, why is there famine all over the world? Why haven't we cured famine and cured hunger and all of that if we can just out of thin air do? Here's something else. You know what? We can take one seed of a man and an egg from a woman and put them in a test tube and grow a baby. Sure, we can. But you got to have, can nobody make the seed of a man without having a man? Can nobody get an egg of a woman without having a woman? You can't out of nothing grow a tree. You can't do that, okay? So I can't explain to you any more than I can explain how out of thin air, pure thin air, God created the earth, spoke it into existence. No more than I can explain or prove that God talked to man and inspired them. I know the Bible tells me that he did, and I believe that. Why is it? Here's a question for all you guys. Somebody told us that certain men wrote the Declaration of Independence. Isn't that right? We even have copies of it with signatures on it. Were you there? Can you prove they wrote it? Do you have eyewitnesses? No. The best you got is somebody else who knew them and witnessed them write it. And guess what? They're all dead. So you don't even have that now. Did John Hancock really sign his name to it? Thomas Jefferson? Were these people even in existence? Were they even real? You have to go by generations of other people telling you this, and for some reason you accept it and you believe it. There is much more evidence that God is real, much more evidence, and yet we deny that. We deny, some of you want to deny that his existence is there or that this is his inspired word of God. This book, the Bible, has lasted through persecution. It has lasted through people trying to burn it out of existence, trying to stamp it out of existence, trying to make it go out of existence, and yet the Bible is still here. The most wildly distributed book in the world. Name another book that has gone through what the Bible has gone through. Name another one. But you will put your faith and hang your hat on the discrepancy that right here it said plural thieves, and over here it just said one. So the whole thing must be wrong.
Well, no. There's a lot for me personally. There's a lot more than that. We just, of course, don't have the time. That was just something partly that I bring up that I was interested in, how you would offer some reconciliation for those who think like you. How does that work in your mind? But going back to this inspiration, I wanted to say I appreciate your honesty, because am I correct when I heard you say it's a matter of faith? It's because you cannot prove that a God or a deity spoke to anyone.
I said, you're absolutely right. I said at the beginning, at the very beginning, when we were at 6 o'clock my time, 7 o'clock yours, I said that the fact of the matter is evidence and science and archaeology and history is only going to take us so far. When it comes down to it, it's a matter of faith. The evidence is there, you guys. You can choose to ignore it and say it's not. It doesn't matter, or the God of the Bible isn't the God that exists, or whatever, or the Bible's in there. You can choose that, or you can choose to say, I believe the evidence that's there and I accept it as the word of God. The choice is yours. But God has designed this for us to make that choice of faith based on what we choose to believe. That's the bottom line of it all. So make your choice and believe. I know God exists, and I know that Bible is his word, because I wouldn't know anything about him except that Bible told me so.
Right.
You don't know
So
nothing about God except
we're
the
in the
Bible.
in the last 4 minutes. Get that. There's one other question down there. It says no. Joanne said no one is saying the creator is not real. The Bible / Jesus is not real. And so okay, I want you to interact with that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. How can you say that the creator is real, but then deny his very own son Jesus? How can you do that? How can you
I think
say
what
that
she's
the
saying,
creator is real?
how do you affirm that that stuff is real? Like this is a person that thinks that there was a creator, there was a consciousness, but the stuff that
I'll go
they're
back.
reading
I'll go
has
back.
issue.
I'll go back. How do you know that the creator is real? The only way you know it is through his Bible. We would have no knowledge that he is even there except he revealed himself through his written word. So where are you getting the conclusion that God is there and that he's real, separate and apart from his word?
Well, Ken, there are different, you know, that people have different beliefs. There are people that believe in a deity. There are people that believe in the supernatural. They have creation stories that have never, these are people that have never heard of Jesus, but there are people out there that believe that it was a creation, but they just don't think it was the God of the Bible.
But they have heard of the Bible and they've learned of God through the Bible.
Well, not everybody. No, I did a video some time back. You know, when we come into contact with these, every now and then we come into contact with uncontacted people, or we have documentation of the first
I remember we had
contact.
that conversation.
Yeah, right. So if that is the case, and then some pastors will even admit, and preachers and even scholars, they admit, yes, there are people out there who have not heard the gospel.
Find them. Find them. I've yet to run into anybody. Who are we to say that said people who we think have never had an opportunity to hear, never had an opportunity to hear? Who are we to say that? We are not
Okay.
everywhere at one time like glory is. So you can't show them to me, prove it to me. Here's another one, Eli. I know we got to go in a second, but here's another one.
Okay, go ahead.
People have often said the Bible has been tampered with. I often said, well, who tampered with it? What's their name? When did they tamper with it? What did they tamper with exactly? And what was their motive for tampering with it? Nobody ever wants to give a name. Nobody ever wants to give a date. Nobody ever wants to give a specific. We just want to say colloquially, oh, well, somebody tampered with it. Just like there are people out there who've never had the opportunity to hear. Where they at? Show me. I'll tell them right now about it. Where they at? Find them. Bring them to me. Take me to them.
That sounds like a good show. There are a few things that come to mind. Well, I'll just put this up as we go. Somebody put this in the chat. Marcian says that Marcian tampered with it, and this individual. And thank you for that. And those of you that are coming in now, I want to thank y'all for coming
I'm gonna look
in.
that up. I never heard of him, but I'm gonna look it up. This one should know.
Yeah, I think I remember that one, and how we got to canon will be important in your studies and that. I really wish we had more time. Ken, you should come back. You should come back and we could talk about the same. We could pick up where we left off if you choose to come back at some point in time in the future to the show. So I just want to thank you for taking the time though, because as I expressed to you, it is very difficult. I can't get any preachers, any believers, especially for the Church of Christ, to come on. But as you can see, I mean, I was respectful. I treated it as an interview,
You
and
did,
we
man.
did
Thank
it.
you. Yeah,
You're
I'm
welcome.
very proud of what you did, Eli. I really am, man. Thank you very much.
And you got the last word. The guest gets to tell us. You said you were writing a book, so tell us what you're doing, and then we'll close out with my video.
My
But
book is
yeah.
my book is fiction. It's not. It doesn't have anything to do with theology. It's fiction. I created a superhero And here I'll tell you about it. It's called Who is the Mighty Kai. You can go to whoisthemightykai.com to check it out. But the idea of it, those of you who like superheroes and fiction and all that kind of stuff, if I ask you who's Clark Kent, most of you will say, well, that's Superman. Who's Peter Parker? You might say that, most of you know that that's Spider-Man. Bruce Wayne is Batman. Well, in my book, nobody knows the superhero's identity, but it is one of the characters. The idea is to read the books, solve the clues, and figure out which character is actually the superhero. So I'm on book 2 right now, and it's also a comic book.
Can you type that? You see where it says private chat, Kim? Because I want to. I don't want to leave without it. Can you just type the link or something in the private chat, and then I can go ahead and share that out, so at least the people can catch up with what you're doing.
Yeah. So I believe it's not religious. It has some themes in it about spirits and stuff, but it's really not a religious book. It's all made up in my head. So if you guys can support it, appreciate it.
Okay.
So I appreciate it, Elijah. I just want to say thanks, man. I will come back again, but this takes the preparation for this took a whole lot of time by my last couple of weeks, bro. So I will come back. We can narrow down a theme and or another subject, and I will come back. And thank you. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, we'll just pick up where we left off, and to all the viewers and everybody, thank y'all for joining in with us. Y'all know what we do. We go out with Chief Kali. We are going to be getting some things for y'all in the background, so this will probably be the last show this week. Thank you to the guests. Thanks to every one of y'all. Peace out.
God in anything, your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything, your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything, your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything, your reflections in. I can find God in anything.
Some people open up their eyes and see the world they know outside. I can close my eyes and see all that and way beyond. When these trials of life come heavy and these obstacles get hard, feeling like I need some answers, I just go and talk to God. I just go and talk to God when I'm looking for guidance. Me more insight, me vision, me direction when I'm blinded. Then I start that conversation with that voice I hear inside me. And the conversation starts with a voice inside that sounds just like me when I talk to God.
See God in anything.
When I talk to God.
Find God in anything.
When I talk to
You
God.
can see God in anything.
When I talk to
I
God.
can find God in anything.
When I talk to God.
See God in anything. Your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything. Your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in.
My daddy said don't ever assume, ask questions. It's ironic it was that advice that helped this song happen. It was also that advice that led me to my life's blessings. That same advice helped me make it through life's lessons. It was that advice that separates grown-ups away from children. That advice can be the difference from knowing or just believing. It was that advice that brought the gavel down on my decision of breaking the mental chains of this man-created religions. It's faith and belief. Nonsense, the biggest scam ever. I hate to say it. I swear this one hell of a mental illness. We don't believe no other time. Why we do it with these religions? The fact that COVID's killing while all of these guys is missing. A lot of hide and seek and peek the fools. Guys playing games with you. I'ma just assume he ain't got no COVID miracles. Maybe he ran out after making the donkey talk, or them stories about a guy walking on water tides. This is simply a distraction to keep you away from you and to look outside for a guy when the God is inside of you. When you close your eyes at night to pray to that voice you talking to, when you ready to face the truth, you realize that voice is you.
You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in. You can see God in anything your reflections in. I can find God in anything I'm reflecting in.